is the budget hearing for 2015 county budget. And I just wanted to go over a brief history of how the process has come together, where the numbers have been, and where they are today. July 14th, 2014, the Board of County Commissioners issued a 2015 preliminary budget guideline to the electeds and to the department heads. To summarize, revenue levels for tax rates, fees, and service charge were to remain status quo. Expenditure levels were status quo with the 6/30/2014 budget level, and any increases were to be absorbed into the 2015 preliminary budget as presented. On August 12th, the elected official departments returned those preliminary budgets to the auditor. And then on September 3rd, the auditor presented that to the public and to the commission. The preliminary budget had revenues of $26,642,576, again, which was $366,704 below the level of the 2014 budget. Expenditures were $33,747,431, which was $5,177,346 above the 2014 status quo levels. In the 2014 budget, we had expenditures over revenues of $1,568,035. So those in combination represented a net difference of expenditures over revenues of $7,104,855. Since then, the commission and the departments and the electeds have had a number of budget workshops and meetings to discuss their requirements, their goals, their objectives, and their needs. And on November 17th, the Commission published a revised 2015 preliminary budget. After the 17th to today, there have been some additional revisions made, and I'll speak to all of those revisions cumulatively rather than splitting them out to before November 17th and after November 17th. So in general, the revisions were to increase revenues by $1,662,945 to $28,305,521. $1 million of that is to record a change in the way we record, receipt, and disperse 911 taxes. So we're estimating a receipting of additional million in 911 enhanced taxes, as well as doing the disbursement to NACECOM of $1 million. The state auditor had suggested that we do that through current expense funds rather than in a special fund that we had previously used in the past to maintain transparency to the public. So that's a $1 million increase in revenues as well as a $1 million disbursement in expenditures. Expenditures reduced by $1,829,830 to $31,917,601. Now again, those expenditures include that $1 million, revenues increasing and expenditures increasing for that same $1 million. This represents a net revenues to expenditure difference of $3,612,080. This will reduce the projected general fund ending balance from $6,432,978, which is where we expect it to be at the end of this year, to $2,820,898. For a summary of some of the changes, the material changes in revenue, as stated before, the increase is $1,662,945. Those are made up of $1 million in the receiving of the 911 tax, a reduction of $11,000 in grants predominantly from DEM, an increase in other grants of $113,536, a transfer of a project that we had in facilities to a special fund into the refund of $575,000, addition of $92,708 of the 1% property tax increase, $1,065,276 in revenue estimates by the treasurer, and a reduction of $22,575 of other various revenue adjustments. The expenditure increases of $3,347,516 included, again, the disbursement of that $1 million in 911 tax, a transition of computer and phone costs from general fund departments to current expense non-departmental. In other words, it's a net zero transaction. However, all of the departments that were paying for phones and for computers would have their budgets reduced by that amount, and current expense non-departmental would be increased by that amount. Zero impact to dollars.
I'm curious about that. Why not into IT support services?
The payments would be coming out of non-departmental instead of the departments, but to IT. So the expense is, in 2014, is in all of the departments and the elected offices, and that's going to be transitioned to non-departmental, but in both cases, the payments are going to go to IT. No net increase or change in the number of dollars. An increase of $200,000 to allocate for countywide facilities maintenance that we have not had in the past. $149,225 to increase medical insurance, and a 1.6 COLA for non-represented employees. Increase of $70,000 for state audit fees. An increase for costs for all departments except the Sheriff's Office, which includes elimination of 1.4 FTEs and the addition of 5.4 FTEs, which is a net increase of 4 FTEs of $335,310, and an increase to the Sheriff's Office of $1,592,981, and that increase includes 5 FTEs. However, most of those start in the 3rd or 4th quarter. The following page gives the details of the current revised budget as it stands. The revised budget as it was printed on 11/17. The original preliminary budget that was presented back in September, and the 2014 budget status quo as of June 30th, 2014. The following page includes all of the other special funds, to include county road, public health, landfill, and sewer and water treatment facilities, as well as a number of other special funds. The next 3 or 4 pages include details of the modifications and changes that were made. The first page represents the changes that were made up until November 17th, and the top of the page represents the changes that were made after November 17th publication of the revised preliminary budget. The following, or the last 3 pages, then is our presentation of the general fund's ending balance. The projection for the end of this year is that our general fund ending balance will be $7,007,804. So that would be the beginning cash balance for the 2015 budget. From that, we would deduct our 13th month expenditures, as well, resulting in a beginning balance of $6,432,978 for ending fund. Allocating a 12% operating reserve against that of $3,428,414. That brings us down to $3,004,564 in available funds for ending fund balance. The net adjustments to revenues and expenditures leaves us with a projected expenditure of revenues expense for 2015 based on this preliminary budget of $3,007,804. $3,612,080, reducing our cash and ending our cash balance at $2,820,988 to begin 2016 fiscal year. Any questions?
So I think one of the things that's probably important to point out as well is our bow wave. On that last page, over on the far right hand side, Mr. Pittner had put an X by the reoccurring expenses that we will see year after year. And it brings a total of reoccurring expenses of $1.8 million. And it's important to note that it does not include cost of living increases and medical increases that could be anticipated in 2016, as well as the full cost of the 2 deputies and 2 correction officers, 4 total sheriff's office staff increases that are anticipated for the 3rd and 4th quarter. So that reoccurring expenses number of 1.8 could potentially be up to 2.1 plus COLAs.
Plus COLAs.
Are there any questions from anybody out in the audience regarding this?
Frank, the 2.8 million that's projected for the general fund entity balance, now that assumes also the 9 to 12% reserves.
No, that is the ending fund balance.
That is the ending fund balance after the reserves, or
Before the reserves. So we have 6 million, fine.
right?
We would take off 3 million, 6. That leaves us a little less than $3 million.
And what are we going? We're going with 9 or 12?
Here we're going with 12.
We're going with 12.
And the reason for that is the state auditor has recommended that the reserves be 2 to 3 months operating costs, which at the maximum would be 25%. So our resolutions say between 9 and 12. The state is recommending 25%. So our analysis is looking at the maximum 12%.
Is there a plan to increase those reserves?
At this point, there have been discussions between the
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Only a detail here, Frank. You've got December the 2nd on the top and throughout the report.
It's December 1st.
Should be December 1st.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking I lost a day somewhere too.
One of the questions I have is the IT and the idea of taking it out of our general fund instead of putting it into the individual. Now, I remember that I took issue with that and I disagreed with that. I know that you wanted to do that. Did Commissioner Sheldon agree to do that? Because I don't remember.
Last I heard, yes. Well, we can confirm that when he gets back.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no monetary impact because it can change. It doesn't change the overall numbers, and what it does is changes the mechanism of
No,
charging.
I agree. And that's the part I disagree. It's not the money aspect of it. It's the idea of keeping them in charge of their own destiny, knowing exactly what they're doing with the money. When we do things and we put it all into doing the cost of doing business, none of them already understand how that works. Throwing another one in there doesn't help the process. But even more than that, it makes it to where they like healthcare, you don't care. You know, if you're not paying attention to it. During this whole process, when we were talking about money in the last years or so, it was nice when they understood what they were being asked to give up or not give up and stuff by being involved in coming out of their budget. That was my opinion. So.
And I would, on that same vein, I question whether or not you would be accounting for it correctly, because I know the auditor's office and BAR's numbers changes to the elected officials, and we now have to identify those costs associated with the elected officials. So if I don't have my IT I don't know what the IT amounts are for my position as an elected official. How are you gonna account for those pursuant to the state auditor's recommendations?
We'll have to take a look at that. Yes.
I will.
Taking my notes here on that one as well, thank you. You didn't send me a note on that, did you? So I'd ask for the input from people, that would have been helpful, thanks. Yes.
And Frank, on that courthouse security, you have $48,995 for adding one FTE corrections officer campus security. Is that been approved?
Yes.
I don't recall it ever been approved.
It's a
That's
part
next.
of the 1,592,981 increase in the sheriff's office budget.
Is that a private corrections officer? Is it the sheriff's? You said it was the sheriff's.
No, it's not a private firm. This would be transitioning the corrections officers back into weapons screening and increasing it by one to include campus security.
If I might, just one other question. Do you have an estimate of how much we're spending on courthouse security, including this one FTE?
A little over 210,000 off the top of my head.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll open it for public testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody like to testify on proposed budget?
Thank you, Commissioners. Tom Davis, 170 West Woodford Road. A couple of things. First, I would request that you continue the hearing if you don't close public comment so that Mr. Sheldon could be here to participate. He happens to be my representative, and I appreciate his attendance here on matters that are mandated to commissioners. And that would be this process. I think it's necessary for all three commissioners to be involved, so I would request that you continue this hearing for that reason, and if necessary, I'll repeat my remarks. The other thing is, it's not nitpicking too much, but courthouse security has always been a bit of a bugaboo for me, because it came about kind of like out of left field. It was originally about 3 years ago. It was brought to the attention. It was a Grays Harbor incident, as you recall, 3 or 4 years ago, and everybody got pretty excited about it, and so we wanted to adopt the courthouse security here. It was on a trial basis for the last 2 quarters of, I think it was, it might have been 2010, 2011, and then, of course, it became a permanent budget item, and it was budgeted at that time at $180,000. We were promised that we'd see some sort of performance, whether or not it was worth the money and the effort, and that never came about. What we saw about a year later was all the potential weapons that were confiscated in Grays Harbor, but not here. I'm wondering, this is a small community, life has its risks, and whether or not that's money well spent, and now we're seem to be adding to it, where we're going to have a roving patrol officer that my understanding is, between the conversations that happened at the briefing, we're going to have an officer that is capable of coming over here if there's a problem here, or around the whole campus. There's nothing to substantiate to justify this cost as far as I can see. I'd like to see something that would be less than what we have. Not that I'm looking to have an incident, although there just only has really been one particular incident of some defendant banging his head against the window a few years ago, and did his self-harm more than anyone else. If you notice, when you go upstairs, and you look to the right, you see the assessor's office. There's a woman there about 4'11". She has no barriers or anything, and she's where you come to complain about your property taxes, and she's all by herself. Although when she looks at you, you say, this is not someone I want to fool with. So she commands respect, and that's one of her talents. But there's nothing between her and the public, is my point. She's right out there in the open, mixing it up, engaging with the public, like we all need to do. Every time we put a barrier between ourselves and the public, we insulate ourselves from the public, and you create an atmosphere of them and us. There's a compromise to be made here, where you have to take into account your own safety, but you also have to realize that you are a part of this whole. You're not by yourself, and sometimes we in the public feel separated from our commissioners, and I know that you go through great lengths sometimes to make sure that it doesn't happen, but it does. And we start putting up barriers between us and the judges and so on. We lose what we came here for, and that is our small town effect, the fact that we trust one another to behave within certain realm of decency. So I would like to see them just take another look at whether it's worth spending $210,000 on courthouse security when we really don't have a justification for that expense. The other thing, and one of the reasons I wanted Mr. Shelley here, because I wanted to talk about increasing the sheriff's patrol on a voluntary basis. In other words, a citizen patrol, and I know there's been some efforts along those lines. But my conversations with the sheriff's office, both now and quite frankly a couple of years ago, is there is no magic number. The costs continue to rise. There's never going to be a completely funded sheriff's department. So we are going to have, the citizens, we're going to have to start setting up, we want patrol stepping up, we're going to have to patrol our own areas if that's necessary, especially in our rural counties. What we've learned is that when you take a subdivision and you put an officer and you station that officer there, crime drops dramatically. Not because he's engaged in stopping crime, he's just there, or she's just there. The presence of someone caring, of driving around a neighborhood, decreases crime. So if we can't afford to hire all the officers that we need to patrol the county efficiently, then we're going to have to do something. There should be some effort along the lines of the sheriff's department and maybe the county commissioners to see if we can't step up as volunteers, an auxiliary sheriff's department, to step up and at least drive around during the hours of, let's say, 10 p.m. or 4 a.m. when most of the crime occurs. Because we never, in a rural area, which I live, ever see a patrol car, especially in the evening. That alone would help a great deal, and maybe control some of the costs. And the last thing I'd like to just mention is that we can never have a discussion about expenditures without having a discussion about revenues. We seem to separate the two, and there's just so far you can cut your way out of debt. You have to look at the other side of the equation. And the other side of the equation, unfortunately, seems to, in the time I've been here, 4 or 5 years, it seems to be separated. Once we get this budget passed, we don't look at it again because the crisis is over. And then a few months as we get closer to July, we realize, oh my gosh, we're going to be even a larger disparity between revenues and expenditures. And we've been drawing on these reserves. And we're down now where we've lost our buffer. So we're counting on hope that the economy will increase and we're going to bring in more revenue. The only revenue source that the county has is taxes. It's a dirty word, but that's what it is. So you're either going to increase taxes eventually because costs are going to continue to rise, or we're going to have to completely take an entirely different look at how our money is spent and how our services are provided, and maybe look at that and say, we can't afford the services any longer. And I think that would be a serious, serious mistake, but I think it's probably a discussion we're going to have to make in 2016. So those are, just to finish that thought off, Starting January 2nd, we need to have a discussion about revenues. We need to take a hard look at how we're going to approach the budget for 2016. And I hope we will do that without any delay whatsoever. Thank you. Yes.
A couple of the little parts here, the courthouse security. Now, I'm inclined to always err on the side of safety, and I can't disagree with you. And I don't know the impact that it's had. I'm curious to find out. I didn't know that they were going to bring in deliverable. I'd sure like to see the deliverable. Problem I have in my mind is I can't figure out how to prove something that didn't happen. And so, but I will continue to ask about that and see what we can find out, because if that was an option, boy, to remove that, those judges and stuff, I deal with some pretty angry people at times.
We all do.
And
weapons confiscated was the performance measure.
yeah, and so I will ask about that, because I'm curious myself. And I don't think having the campus security would buffer us. At least I would hope it would be there to help protect those that do, if something does start to happen. The citizens patrol, boy, do I ever agree with you. The problem is we have no control over that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I've heard the sheriff talk about it numerous times and all the liabilities that come with it. And that's why he stayed away from it. And I can't second guess him on that. Now, I personally, as you remember, I'm a fan of cherry tops on the top of all vehicles, including the sheriff's vehicle, so that everybody knows who's coming. Visibility, I think, does have an impact on crime. And when they see the cops, even if you don't do anything, just seeing them is enough to deter somewhat. So I definitely believe in that. Now the tax thing, I've got to chide you a little bit on that one, because last year after we did our budget, you won me over after the fact on the 1%. You guilted me pretty heavy, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, maybe I should have not done the 1% after all. And here you are telling me to do tax. So I have to give you some heck on that one, because literally I've been thinking about this whole process, our conversation from a year ago in regards to that. So
Life changes, yes, sir.
okay.
Anybody else like to testify on the proposed budget? No other testimony? Department heads, elected officials, you're more than welcome to weigh in. Okay, thank you. Discussion or if motions continue?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to continue this hearing, and also at the request of constituent, so I believe we should have that person's representative here in case they have questions or opinions they want to express to their representative. This is a very, very important part of our job, and for us to make choices without all three present will not be different challenge. What do you think of after tomorrow's meeting?
To have a hearing after tomorrow's meeting or continue?
To continue until after tomorrow's meeting, so that Commissioner Shelton will be
Or
here.
we could add it to tomorrow's meeting.
Okay.
Because of the stuff,
Yeah.
and then maybe begin.
Yes, I'm good. So I'll move that we table this and have it added to our agenda for tomorrow's meeting.
Keeping public comment open.
Keeping public comment open.
Okay, and I'll second that motion. It's been moved and seconded to continue this hearing until December 2nd, to be added to the December 2nd regular meeting agenda under item 1.1. Motion for the public hearing, 9:30. Says, this budget hearing will be continued until 9:30, December 2nd. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carried. That's a 3-0.